Is a psychology degree really that useless? Well, it can be useless if you don't know what to do with it. So, I'm going to tell you what you can do with it so that it's not useless. Welcome back if you are a returning viewer, and welcome if you are a first timer, and I hope you stay and subscribe and join the family. Anyways, let's get into the video, let's not waste time. So there are currently 9 areas of psychology that you can go into, and I'm going to put a little diagram to show you all the different 9 areas, and I'm going to go through them one by one to show you guys what you can do with your psychology degree now that you've finished or almost finished your psychology undergrad. So for your psychology degree to be useful, there's a chance that you're going to need to do a master's or a doctorate or some other type of qualification before you can go into your career of choice, and that's where the good pay is at. Because I've had psychology jobs and I'm still doing psychology jobs which are just from my degree, but I can promise you the pay is just not it. Both of them are under 20k a year, which you can't really live on. So let's begin with health. Health psychologists work to improve general well-being and understanding physical illnesses from a psychological perspective, and they tend to advise the healthcare system on the best forms of treatment and the best way to deal with certain illnesses and so on and so forth. So health psychologists tend to work in hospitals, communities, wherever health is needed, hospitals obviously, wherever there's a focus on health or a need for health professionals, you will find a health psychologist there. So in order to become a health psychologist, you will need to do a master's degree in health psychology. Wherever you do your master's, it needs to be accredited by the BPS. So when you're checking, the best place to check is the BPS website, because they will list universities that are accredited to provide that master's. So after you've done your master's, you will need to do a stage 2 doctorate level qualification, and then as soon as you qualify, you can jump to a band 7 salary in the NHS. And as a health psychologist, you can also go into research. So the next field of psychology that you can go into is clinical psychology. They deal with mental and psychological issues like depression, anxiety, and so on and so forth. Clinical psychologists, they do research, they do assessments, interviews, investigating patients and their issues that they bring forward, and they do similar things to counsellors, but they don't. So they research and assess, and then once they finish their assessment of somebody, they can refer you to a counsellor or a therapist if they feel the need to. So just like health psychologists, they also work with other professionals to deal with one individual patient. So it might be like social workers or doctors or whoever else is involved within that patient. So in order to become a clinical psychologist, you need to do a 3-year doctorate at an accredited university, of course, and then once you qualify, you can jump straight onto the band 7 salary in the NHS if that's where you wish to work. If not, but the salary is quite good from this looks of. So the third one is educational psychology. Now educational psychologists obviously work within school systems, school settings, early year settings. It's all about educating young people and children. So they look into developmental issues, learning disabilities, social and emotional problems that children might go through, and then they work with schools, social workers, maybe parents, and advising them on how best to take care and treat a child that is going through certain things. So in order to become an educational psychologist, you would need to do a doctorate in educational psychology. So to do this doctorate, you have to apply through the Association of Educational Psychology, not directly through the university itself that you want to go to. However, if you're in Scotland, you have to do an accredited master's degree in educational psychology and then a stage 2 in qualification in educational psychology. Now the average salary in the UK for educational psychology is around 40k, and it can go as high as 100k. So there's good money to be made if you have more experience. So the next area in psychology is academia, research and teaching. So people who do this are usually lecturers, from what I gather, because lecturers don't do lecturing full time. A lot of them will do research on the side, write books on the side, go to conferences and speaking engagements and stuff like that. So if you're going to do this, this is something that will probably be like one of many things that you would be doing. You can't make a lot of money just from this alone. So you would need to have 5 or more years in supervision in some professional activity, which is easy to gain through a PhD, where you are doing research as part of your PhD. So people in this field normally work in higher education settings like colleges, universities, and they can also work in research units. And instead of like an annual salary, there's more of like a research contract. So research contracts can be anything from around 13k to 20, maybe sometimes 30k. So if like the NHS asks you to do research, or the government asks you to do research on something, then you'll be paid for that specific research. It's not like an annual or monthly salary kind of thing. So next, on to occupational psychology, which is really good. I had a friend who went into occupational psychology after we finished our psychology degrees. So with this, you would be working in businesses and companies and helping them to find the most effective way of working. So you would obviously be talking to like managers, HR, or even sometimes the employees themselves to find out what motivates them and what would make the working environment better. Sometimes managers would need your expertise on how to become a better manager, how to create a better team, and how to improve team morale, and anything to do with just improving the working environment essentially, and improving operations within the business, whether that's motivation, break times, structure of the day, anything like that. You can also go into consultancy, and this would obviously make you a lot of money. So you can be hired by companies to come in and just work for a specific period of time, 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever it might be, and then they'll charge you for your services. So in order to become an occupational psychologist, you need a master's in occupational psychology, and then you need to do a stage 2 qualification in occupational psychology, and then you would have 2 years of supervision once you're employed, and then you would need to register with the HCPC. Now the starting salary is between 20k to 29k, but obviously with more experience it can go up to 80k, so there's a lot of money to be made here. And there is also a demand for occupational psychologists, so it's a good field to go into because there's a high demand for them at the moment. Counselling psychology obviously is just a bit similar to what I'm currently doing, but the main difference I think from what I found is that counselling psychologists do research, whereas counsellors and psychotherapists like us, we don't really go into research. So counselling psychologists will obviously see people, talk to people about whatever they're going through, assess them and whatnot, and do research based on the things that they find from that. In order to become a counselling psychologist, you would need to get a doctorate in counselling psychology, but beforehand you would need to make sure you've got your counselling skills certificate that you've done beforehand, before you even think about applying for a PhD. If you don't want to do the PhD, you can do the society's qualification in counselling psychology instead, and then you would register with the HCPC as soon as you're done, and then you can start working. You can expect a salary of 40k to 45k, which is in the band 7 in the NHS. With more experience it can go up to 53k to 60k per year, so there's also good money in that. Next we have neuropsychology, which is it's something that I wanted to do once upon a time. So obviously neuropsychologists work with people who have brain injuries, strokes, toxic disorders in the brain, anything like that. They assess the brain, they work on treatments, and then they obviously assess treatments to see how well they worked and what hasn't worked. And they also work in rehabilitation to obviously assess people and how they improve. Neuropsychologists can also work in research. They can also work as witnesses in court to provide evidence. So in order to become a neuropsychologist, you would need to have done an accredited postgraduate degree in either clinical or educational psychology of some sort, and then you would need to do the society's qualification in clinical neuropsychology. Now the average salary for a neuropsychologist in the UK is around 59k, and it can increase if you take on more responsibilities such as administration or being a witness in court. Now one of my other favourites is sports and exercise psychology. So sports and exercise psychologists work with athletes or people who are just interested in sports. They can work with teams or individuals, amateurs, professionals. They can work with anybody. They can be consultants. So they work with people such as coaches, referees, and kind of give them advice and guide them on how to work with their teams or their athletes that they're working with. And they also work with athletes or people who've been injured in sport to help them rehabilitate them and help them get treatment, so they'll be there alongside that. And as consultants, obviously they could be hired by, let's say, Team GB at the Olympics and work with them throughout the Olympics. So in order to become a sports and exercise psychologist, you would need to do a master's in sports and exercise psychology, and then you would need to do a stage 2 qualification in sports and exercise psychology, or you could do a doctorate in sports and exercise psychology if you really wanted to. And then you would need to register with the HCPC as soon as you're done, and then you can start working. You can expect a salary starting from 20k to 50k, and obviously the higher end is the more experience you have, and so on and so forth. The last one is forensic psychology, which was something that I was briefly interested in as well. So forensic psychologists work with prisoners and offenders and people who work in prisons to relieve their stress levels, and to also provide treatment for how to cope in prisons. And they do profiling, and they work as witnesses in court sometimes. So they do treatment programs for prisoners and offenders as well, and they work with like mental health tribunals and parole boards. So in order to become a forensic psychologist, you would need a master's in forensic psychology, and then you would need to do a stage 2 qualification in forensic psychology, and you can expect a salary starting from 30k to 46k, going up as high as 53k. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. That brings us to the end of this video. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed and brought me this far. A few things to take away before I end the video. Before you apply for any masters or doctorates, you need to be registered with the BPS. And for some of the things that are related to health, you would need to be registered with the HCPC as soon as you qualify. The number 2 thing to take away is that you'll be working with other professionals in a lot of these fields. So you rarely be working alone and just you by yourself. You'll need to work with teams of like social workers, doctors, teachers, and other professionals within that field. And if you're planning on applying for a doctorate, or if your course or if your chosen career requires a doctorate, please try and get as much experience as you can. Experience will put you so far ahead in your application, and it will make you more appealing, and it increases your chances of being accepted. So good luck and enjoy the bloopers. You would need to do accredited postgraduate, you would need to have done a post. You then have to do what's known as a stage 2 qualification. You will need to do pardon me. In health psychology, these people work with improving general, so they promote general well-being, So there are currently 9. So there are about 9 areas of psychology, and I am in the counselling branch. So sorry, yeah, we back. Ooh yeah, ooh yeah. Okay. So they work in hospitals, communities, GPs, anywhere that's who you'll need a master. You do not necessarily have to work like with people like clients and patients who, you know, need health. You can do these. Let me leave that out. Clinical psychology deals with mental and psychological issues like depression, depression. So they work with obviously assessing the brain damage and seeing how the brain operates when it's Okay guys, that brings us to the end of this video. Thank you so much for tuning in. In the comment section below, let me know what field of psychology you're trying to get into, and I hope to see you guys next week. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I will see you next week at 12 p.m. Bye!